Hello and welcome to Simon's Rants. I'm going to be talking about different movies, music, TV shows, all different kinds of media like that, and giving you my thoughts and opinions on those things. Today in particular, we're going to be looking at when did Tim Burton go bad? When did style become more important than content? And to understand that, we have to look at everything that he's really done. Now, if you ask the average moviegoer, what's your favorite Tim Burton movie? The majority of them will probably say The Nightmare Before Christmas. Some might even say James the Giant Peach, or Coraline. Now, the problem with that is none of those movies were actually directed by Tim Burton. They were actually directed by a man named Henry Selick, and he often doesn't get any of the credit because on the movie posters and the trailers it will say from the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas. So if Tim Burton didn't actually direct any of those movies, has he actually ever made anything good, or are we just giving him credit for things that he never did? Now, to answer that, let's look at the movies he actually did direct. Now, if you don't count Tim Burton's directorial debut, which was a movie about Pee-wee, you look at his first four movies, he actually did have some good movies in there. It was Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, and Batman Returns. Now, if Tim Burton actually made these four good movies, then is that possible that he's just misremembered as doing other movies that he didn't do, but he's actually still a good director? Yes and no, because he's still the same director who did Planet of the Apes and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So when did Tim Burton go from the genius who made Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands to the guy who makes the weird Johnny Depp movies? And to answer that question, I think you can really honestly just narrow it down to when he lost his ability to come up with good ideas. And you can say, well, that's easy to say about any director, but Tim Burton actually shows it very clearly for us when that happened. In the early 2000s, he switched from making creative, new ideas to making remakes of other movies. And you could say Batman itself is a remake, but I honestly don't really count those as him showing a lack of creativity. He was bringing superheroes to the screen like it had never been done before. What I'm talking about is when he started remaking movies that already existed. Starting in the early 2000s and continuing until now, he's made primarily remakes of other people's movies. He made Planet of the Apes, he made Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, he made Alice in Wonderland, and he made Dark Shadows. None of which were received well at all. In fact, all of them were considered worse than the source material that they were based off of. He even directed his first stop-motion movie, The Corpse Bride, in 2005. 2005. Something that he's often known for is something he actually didn't even do until 25 years after Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice. The thing that Tim Burton is often most known for, he actually didn't even start doing until 17 years after Beetlejuice. It was no longer him coming up with new and different ideas. It was him trying to fit the mold of what people thought of him. His original movies were dark and different, but they were also creative and made new atmospheres and new worlds that had never existed before. But once he was known for that, he had to keep trying to outdo himself in that, much like M. Night Shyamalan had to do with his plot twist at the end of his movies. Tim Burton didn't have much success with his movies in the early 2000s, so he actually reverted back to something that people thought he did but never really did. The Nightmare Before Christmas. By Tim Burton making The Corpse Bride, he was trying to recreate something that he never did to begin with. And it's true that The Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie both did well, but those weren't actually original projects. They were something he was trying to recreate from something that he didn't actually do. It was less of a return to form and more trying to attain something that people already thought about him that wasn't true. So is Tim Burton a bad director? I don't think so. I know that he has the talent and the ability because we saw it early on in his career. We even see it in his later projects now, like The Corpse Bride and Frankenweenie. But at some point, style became more important than content. He stopped making new creative and different ideas and started doing the same repetitive thing based off of something he didn't even create to begin with. He seemed to start chasing a ghost of himself. He seemed to start making style more important than content. And maybe it's because he could never live up to his early films, or maybe it's the fact that he could never live up to The Nightmare Before Christmas. Think about it. Isn't that the first movie you think of when you hear the name Tim Burton? So he became obsessed with trying to recreate that. He became obsessed with trying to live up to these expectations for him that were honestly unfair. The fact of the matter remains, when it's all said and done, Tim Burton will be remembered as a good director. He may be thought of now as a mediocre director or even a bad director, but when it's all said and done, he will still be remembered for his classics. So don't think of those movies when you think of Tim Burton. Think of the classics that made him who he was. And if the first movie that you think of when you hear the name Tim Burton is actually The Nightmare Before Christmas, then maybe you should look up Henry Selick and actually appreciate him for the movies he's done. So is Henry Selick actually a better director than Tim Burton? I think that's a debate for a different day. I'm Simon from Simon's Rants. That was my rant for today.